Welcome back to NutraRounds with Ashley, Jake, and Todd. And today we are super excited to have James White from KBMO with us today. I'm so excited about this, James, because I've used a couple of your guys' tests with my family and really found the information useful and immediately applicable. So can't wait to hear from you. And we got a lot of things we'd love to discuss with you. But really first, I just kind of want to hear about what led you to start KBMO as the principal there, and tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, let me start with what KBMO stands for, and then kind of hopefully that'll kind of, it all ties back from there a little bit. So K is for Catherine, my wife. B is for Ben, my son. M, Max, my middle son. And we, as I always say, we can save the best to last. O, Olivia, my daughter. So, like all of us, we all have our bosses. So those are my four bosses. If anyone is under any illusion that they don't have bosses, then we all have bosses. So I'm very proud of all of them. So KBMO, we started now nearly 15 years ago. And it was really what kind of got me really excited about this was I'd done some work in cardiovascular health, looking at some really interesting specialized diagnostics. But what was a little bit confusing to me was that there was a lot of work going on in this area, but still fundamentally for a lot of cardiologists out there, they were saying eat less and exercise more without any really personalized medicine. And so it kind of felt a bit strange that, it obviously meant they must have had a really good time in college, because if that's what they came up with after 8 years, I missed my gap. So anyway, but no, joking aside. So how do we get some way of looking at that food and diet that was, again, an improvement on eat less, exercise more? The other low-hanging fruit, as they call it, was the food pyramid, which again is probably about as useful as a pyramid. So in essence, I felt like there was quite a lot of gaps in the market to kind of weave into this. So we came across a gentleman called Dr. Brent Dorval, who is a brilliant scientist who developed this test. And it was looking at the food sensitivity area, but with a really different twist on it. And so that was what I was really excited about. So rather than just looking at what foods a patient was exposed to, because again, regardless of the pyramid or eat less, exercise more, we still have to be exposed to foods. That's not optional. But could we come up with a way of personalizing that, and rather than worrying about exposure, really zero in on which foods cause inflammation? Because again, inflammation is the root cause of everything. And so it seemed like a really powerful place to go. When I get involved, we had two people on staff at that point, and a grand total of 3 providers. I did an exhaustive due diligence on all 3 of them, and they all said the same thing. This is an unbelievable test. It works beautifully. Over to you, James. What can you do with it? And so that was 15 years ago. We've got 20,000 providers on board. We have labs all around the world, and turns out that those 3 were pretty accurate. So that's how I got started. And as you can imagine, as all the practitioners out there, just like their business plans, all a straight line, no ups and downs, just as you thought it would go. The world of Excel works well. No, not exactly. So anyway, but no, it worked really well, and we've been very fortunate. We've had a really good team of people within KBMO, and really the focus has been on making sure that we're science driven. We've got really thought leaders in terms of the science that we've worked with. And that's really, I think, helped us kind of stand the test of time. And being slightly crazy helps as well, in terms of going, how do we make sure that, we really dig deep into that science? And as you can imagine, and lots of providers will attest to this as well, it doesn't always work first time, but, you've got to persevere. And I think, it's that perseverance, I think, is really key. And so our approach is family owned, family run, and making sure we put our people first and base it all on the science. And I think the marketing then follows, frankly. So again, if you can make sure you take care of your people, take care of the science, and get a good team ethic going, it's proven to be a very fortunate combination of factors in place.
I love this. As someone personally who's struggled with a lot of sensitivities, inflammation, and weight management challenges my entire life, I think you really probably resonate with a lot of folks when you talk about the calories in, calories out. Yep. First time I went to a cardiologist for an echo, I was in my early 20s, and I didn't really know anything about nutrition yet. And he said, Snickers and broccoli doesn't matter, calories are calories. And I thought, I don't know a whole lot, but that doesn't sound right to me. And so I think that this probably does help a lot of folks who are dealing just with inflammatory conditions. And so many of them, right, worldwide, we see millions of people with food sensitivities, but they aren't aware of it.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
interesting you touch on the
understand.
worldwide thing. I mean, we've done studies in Asia and Japan of all places where you'd think, they're renowned for eating healthily, and they certainly do. But even there, we've seen some dramatic improvements, and the studies we've done there, China, here obviously in the US and Europe, still generally we've seen 80% plus improvement because, to your point, actually, it's focusing in on that inflammation, and I think that's really key. I'm not going to subscribe to the broccoli and Snickers diet, but I think that speaks more to my point. They had 8 years of a lot of fun, and they weren't paying much attention
Right.
if they came back with that, isn't it? But no. So I think it's one of those things where I think it really resonates with patients as well because it's something they can understand, and I think that's always critical in terms of what's going on with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also mentioned how it's not necessarily what you're eating. And I think that's another big key in this, the way that this test works. Because again, in my experience in the past, it's been I eat, beef, potatoes, and spinach, and those are healthy foods, but I'm not feeling good. And I take a test and now I'm reactive to those. So I switch out beef for chicken, etc. You know the drill.
Yeah.
Every test, and now I'm reactive to chicken and not beef. So can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how measuring the antibodies is different and the immune complex versus maybe just
Yeah, absolutely. And it was one of the things that, again, when I first got involved, even 15 years ago, there was a thing called Google, so I'm not that old, but it was remarkable when you looked at IgG. I mean, it was pretty damning, as I'm trying to persuade my wife that this is a really good idea to get involved in food sensitivity testing as she Googles it on the internet. But no, the key is, I think, when you look at IgG, it's really just telling you what you're exposed to. And so, to your point, it had a bad reputation, I think, quite rightly, because it was telling you what you were exposed to. And so that's deeply unhelpful. And then the other thing is, it was telling you everything you were exposed to. So not only was it, basically regurgitating to you what you were consuming, it was also putting the physician in a really difficult spot because they felt like they were putting their patient in like a food prison, because obviously if it's on the report, I've been to see my provider, he's saying that I got to follow everything he does, I've got 30 things here to follow, which is a problem. As we used to kind of not joke because that's unfair, but we'd say like it's bread and water, oops, no bread tonight for you guys. So the reality is, how do we look at it now? By adding that inflammatory pathway, it has a couple of benefits. So the first one, without trying to get too scientific with everyone, is it basically eliminates the false positives. And what we mean by that is it means that taking that long list of 30 plus foods, which is common with an IgG only test, this one really zeroes in on, we want to know what you're exposed to, so that's not a bad thing, but leaving them there is really like leaving them on the edge of a cliff and almost kind of waiting for the wind to blow them over the edge. So what we wanted to do is say, look, let's take you to that point. We know what you're exposed to, but then add this additional pathway. And that's what we kind of say, that's kind of where the magic happens for KBMO, is to say, of that list of 30, which are causing inflammation. And if you can zero in on that, great things happen, because the patient is likely to be compliant to 5 to 10 foods. When you give them 30, and I'm sure all the providers out there have heard this, they watch that patient nod diligently, but they're not, they may be nodding on the outside, but we know on the inside they're going like, not a hope. And it's a natural reaction. There's no way you can take 30 foods out. So I think that's really the big thing, is this test measures these multiple pathways, but in essence, for patients and and for providers, it's measuring the whole immune system versus half of it. And so again, like anything in life, if you look at the whole versus the half, you're going to get a much more accurate response. And so that's what we did. And that was really the brilliance of Dr. Brent Dorval, who invented this test. Again, I'd love to be a reflection on the company I keep, but I can't tell you I'm as great as he is. But, he also invented the first rapid HIV diagnostic. So again, truly brilliant individual who looks at the world slightly differently from the rest of us, thank God, and came up with, looking at that space and going, how do we make this more accurate? And so then what we've kind of grafted on top of that is, how do we then try and simplify it for patients and providers to kind of hit the pain points that you guys see, to make sure that they're no longer there. As I say, that's kind of one of the things, if we're good at anything, is translating that quite complex science into keeping it simple. Because again, as a great guy that we work with, a gentleman called Sachin Patel says, the doctor of the future is the patient. So you need to make sure the patient understands these reports. Again, no disrespect for anyone who sends out a 50-page report. The reality is the patient is good for 2 to 3 pages max. So don't confuse them with weight of the report having anything other than, unfortunately, a bad effect on the forests of all around the country and around the world. So again, our view is keep it short, keep it simple, make that messaging simple for the patient. Trust us, we've got brilliant science because that's our focus. We want to spend much money and time on making sure the science is unique where possible, but certainly best in class in terms of in many respects. Again, we are the only patented food sensitivity test, for example. So again, another important step of, hoping people kind of give them the confidence of running this type of test. And again, we've been around for 15 years and we're now at that luxurious point of, as Jake was talking about snow, the snow, instead of pushing it up the hill, it's coming down the other side, which is a nice place to be in terms of, as all of us know. And again, certainly in the Northeast, we've had our fair share of snow. So again, we're very happy to be seeing that growth that we see. And it's a lot of, fortunately, a lot of referrals from other providers who have had great clinical outcomes and are now keen to share those with not only their patients, but also their colleagues as well, which is a great position.
Absolutely. And you touched on something that I kind of want to dig a little deeper in if we can, focusing on the whole immune system versus just half of it. Really, right, when people are showing reactivity based on what they're exposed to, it's a marker potentially of leaky gut, but your test goes a step further and it really kind of looks at the gut barrier function. Can you expand on what those markers are and why they're so important?
Yeah, and so the basis of that, again, was, we're slightly old-fashioned, I think, in some really positive ways. So one of them is we love to talk to our patients and providers and understand what's working, what's not. A good example of that, if you ever call KBMO, you're going to get a human being, you won't get a chatbot, and you won't get a phone system. That's not because we couldn't afford those two, but we just figured it would be much more relevant for a provider that if they need something fixing, they want to speak to a human and get it done fast. So again, we're very keen to kind of hear from our providers and make sure we listen to what they're saying. And one of the things I would hear, and again, as all small companies, one of my first roles was selling the product up in New Hampshire. So in between the tattoo artists and the kind of karate dojos, there's the odd nutritionist up there, which is fantastic, and naturopaths. So we'd go in and see those guys and we'd hear a few things like, we love this test, we love it's patented, we love the fact you're eliminating these false positives, but some of my patients have leaky gut, so I don't run a food sensitivity test on them. So that kind of stuck in my mind to say, how do we fix that? And so let's look at the immune system in terms of saying, can we work out, by looking at what we're doing currently, can we add a gut barrier panel to it? And so that's what we set about doing. And as I said, we wanted to kind of, again, be responsive to what providers were saying to say, how can we combine those two? So because we're private, we can spend the time and effort to really drill down on those types of comments. So we developed this gut barrier panel, which had Candida, zonulin, occludin, and LPS, or lipopolysaccharides. And I'm sure a number of you have heard of Dr. Rob Silverman, calls it El Diablo. So we'll unpack all 4 of those, so I won't leave you hanging on that. But another example of the kind of science and how we approach things, the zonulin test out there, there was only one at the time, and it was by a German company. I won't name them, but all I'll tell you, it was very un-German on the basis it wasn't very accurate. It was giving different results from morning to afternoon, and it was cross-reacting with a couple of things, haptoglobin and properdin. And so again, as a small company, we're like, fantastic. How do we fix that? And so we partnered with a gentleman called Alessio Fasano, who discovered zonulin and its links with celiac back in the early 2000s, and our very own Dr. Brent Dorval, a brilliant kind of developer of assays. So we put that team together and developed our own zonulin test, which is an antibody test, which is uniquely stable and makes sure it doesn't cross-react with those things. So again, being a small private company enables us to really push those boundaries of saying, look, we're going to invest in this. We don't have any quarterly meetings. We don't have any half-yearly meetings. We just focus on making sure that we're responsive to our clients and making sure, as I said, we use the best of the best, whether that's science or kind of people who work with us in terms of providers who are talking about the testing. And so we brought that zonulin in. So The candida we looked at as a great marker of some kind of early dysbiosis. Is it early stage, something might be going on? The zonulin and occludin are looking at those tight junctions. The zonulin measures, is it functioning properly? Are those tight junctions are opening and closing? And the occludin is looking structurally at those tight junctions together, or they're beginning to kind of fall apart. And then lastly, L Diablo, the lipopolysaccharides, that's looking at all the gram-negative bacteria within the gut. So it gives you a really good indication of what might be going in within the gut as well. And then we said, let's look at this in two different angles. So let's look at IgA and then the IgG. So the IgA says, is it early stage and still localized in the gut, or is it moved across to the IgG and more systemic in terms of the symptoms that you see and different ways it's appearing as well? So the idea was to give providers a snapshot of what might be going on from a leaky gut standpoint. And again, back to love Rob Silverman, let's make sure he's got a book out there that says, don't guess, test. That was an important element. And frankly, in everyone's defense, there wasn't a good way of doing it before we came up with it. And as I hear routinely from providers, they may hand out a lot of stool tests, but compliance is not great. And so you can understand why. So this gives providers and patients a really easy way of getting a lot of information very quickly in terms of, and the testing's a finger stick. So it's really simple to do. And that makes it, it gives us another unique position in the marketplace. So as I said, our focus is how do we keep pushing the boundaries in terms of developing that? And so we'll talk about some of the other tests that we've brought on and why we've done that. Even as a little food sensitivity company, we're like, how do we keep pushing the boundaries to make sure we've got world-class science that is all developed here in the US, mainly in little Hopedale, Massachusetts. That's the idea here, is developing stuff to make sure we can give the providers ultimate confidence in what we do, but more importantly, we can stand very happily about the quality of products we're putting out there as well.
I love that. I was looking down real quick because one of the things you hit upon is you're not going to eliminate 30 different things, but you have this beautiful app that I reference frequently on my phone. And I was going to show that because it's like worst, bad, better, and okay. And I just love that. It's such a great tool. But sometimes I'm one of these people, we live in Wisconsin where, of course, don't take away our cheese or our butter. We were raised on dairy.
It's funny. Top of my notes, don't eat cheese or dairy.
Unfortunately, though, I'm one of those guys who did it for so long that I had no idea that was my red and my orange. I had no idea that was my +4 and my, the top of my list. And so what types of patients by chief complaint are the best candidates for this fit test? Some people come back and they don't realize they're suffering, right? I didn't realize that I had a major issue with dairy until I took it away because I found it on your test. So maybe can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the providers will say, well, I always say to them, look, if you've got a patient who's inflamed, this is a great test. And again, inflammation shows up in many, is it weight loss? Is it gut related? Is it skin related? Leaky gut, leaky brain, all these different avenues of where it goes. So I think traditionally it's been weight loss and then the kind of gut related issues and definitely skin as well. Because if you think about it, psoriasis, things like that, we've had some amazing success stories where patients have had skin related issues and rosacea and things like that, which they've been living with for decades. And so by looking at that, looking at what foods, I try and simplify it to people and say, look, think of any system without getting too technical. But if you think inputs, food, outputs, symptoms. So if you measure those inputs, then you should be having a positive impact on those outputs and those various kind of symptoms that are presented with. So the idea here is look at it simply like that. We're not trying to confuse the patient. We're going to say, look, let's see what you're eating. Or, the other analogy we always give is, when you go out and buy a new car, you listen religiously to the car dealer who says you need to put premium, whatever gas it is in the car, and we all follow that. So think of your body as the car and say, okay, what's the gas I need in my car, my body, that's going to make my car or my engine work as efficiently as possible? And so that's really what I think the power of measuring those inputs, as we call it. But as I say, traditionally it was looking at gut-related issue, just stomach. But I think, 15 years ago, it's interesting. We did a clinical study and we saw mood, depression as the top symptoms. 15 years ago, they would have probably carried me off in a straitjacket if we'd kind of said to the world, we're gonna look at your diet and we're gonna be able to tell you what's going on in your brain. Nowadays, that's like, of course, James, that's obvious, isn't it? Leaky gut leads to leaky brain. And so we've got lots of neuro specialists looking at the test and telling me about these unbelievable outcomes where they kind of look at me sideways and go, well, it's actually leaky brain leads to leaky gut. I'm somewhat relaxed about that. But the good news is that we've got more and more people looking at it because that underlying inflammation or fire, which is being caused by any one of these foods, if you take more and more of it, then it's kind of setting off those symptoms. And so I think that's the great thing about this test. If you've got a patient who's inflamed, and I mean, with non-specific type symptoms, things like autoimmune diseases and stuff like that, this is a great way to get to the root cause. But more than that, I think patients love this test because it's something they can do themselves, as well as there's no judgment. I mean, I'm not sure the last time anyone told me about how high their triglycerides were, but generally what people will tell you is, look, I did this test and like you did, Jake, it was dairy. And so there's no judgment that, especially in Wisconsin, that you're eating a lot of dairy. In fact, exactly the opposite. So, but my point is it's a good thing that, people can have that communication. They can talk about it. And with the app now, to your point, they've got it in the palm of their hand. So if they're grocery shopping, they've got a meal plan on there so they can go and follow that through. If they're out for dinner, they've got it with them. And generally, they love to share it with their friends and family. And so for the providers listening who, marketing might be one below accounting in terms of things they've got to do tonight, don't panic. The app is a great marketing tool because patients love to share this with their friends and family. And what you'll see is one member of the family gets tested, and then before you know it, lots of the others will come in as well. So again, it's a great marketing tool for, the solo practitioner out there to kind of get the patients in based on making sure they check out the app, which is really helpful in terms of deciphering stuff.
That's exactly kind of what we experienced. My daughter was next to take it and she had, ongoing issues with her tummy. And we discovered she's got, wheat issues. And, constantly as you're looking at, are we going to make meals? Or are we going to do the hot lunch thing? It kind of reinforces it. And we can look at when we're out, what are the other things on that list that might add to that fire? I do love that you guys offer the panel, the GI panel as a follow-up test to the bigger test. So once you know what you're really struggling with, you can retest that. What I'd love for you to tell us is maybe walk us through how are we collecting the tests? And then once you get those results back, what does that look like for the patient and going forward? You kind of hit upon that already, but maybe.
Yes, it's a finger stick or a blood draw for, those in favor of full employment for the phlebotomist. But generally, the finger stick is an easy way of doing it because the patient can do it in the comfort of their home or they can do it in the office, depending on what you prefer. Especially with kids, sometimes it's easier for it to be done at home. It's a lot less traumatic. And so, we found that that's what worked well. Make sure you're hydrated. And again, make sure gravity is your friend. And so that means make sure your finger's down low when you do the sample. Don't provide the perfect tourniquet by kind of trying to do it kind of in an upward motion. So obvious things. But again, it's, when you've got the test, you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to get this blood onto this card. It's very simple. And as I say, there's a short video to watch. It then gets mailed. We've made sure the beautiful thing is the stability is 30 days. So it'll get mailed from you guys locally there. Across the lab in Boston. Generally takes a few days to get there. 7 to 10 business days later, the results firstly go to the provider. Because again, we are provider only. We're not direct patient. We want the providers to have all that fun. We don't want to kind of get in the middle of it. So the idea is to keep very much direct to provider. Results come to the provider. They have a portal that we set up when they sign up with us, which again enables them to kind of download those results. They'll see in the portal when the test has arrived with us, and they'll see when it's ready to be sent out. With the report, they get a meal plan as well. And so I think that's another important step because, again, I'm yet to find a provider that goes, yeah, after I've done my accounting and marketing, great, I get to do some meal plans at night. So generally, it's another one of those steps which we want to work with them on. Each of those meal plans is individualized per patient, which is a really cool thing. And then, so the idea is the provider gets both of those documents. They can run that through with the patient. And then 14 days after it gets to the provider, we then email that patient app to the patient. So the idea is, then they've got it on their phone. Again, we used to say, well, it's all right, stick it onto your fridge, but the days of magnetic fridges are probably long gone. The idea is by having it on your phone, that's something that I think everyone has now in terms of smartphone, and it works for Android and Apple. And we've got it now available, I think, English, Spanish, Portuguese. All these things have become much easier these days to try and give people access to those results. Color coded it as well on the basis red is bad, dark green is good. We want patients to understand it. We took the view that telling their zonulin is 23 means about as much as it does when I've just said that statement now. The idea, but if it says it's red, then I must have to do something about it. And when they look at the report, what we say, if any of these 8 markers are elevated, please refer to your provider with regards to a good gut healing protocol. And so again, for us, it's important to link those supplements, and we've, obviously the best Nutridyne in terms of the supplements that come looking at the food sensitivity as well as the gut barrier panel. And so to your point, Jake, the idea is 6 months later is to rerun that gut barrier panel. Again, you can tell we're not a finance-owned company on the basis we've dropped that price dramatically, because if we believe all disease begins in the gut and everyone talks about being data-driven, let's give the patient and the providers some data to say, look, we use the supplements over that 6-month period, and all of those markers went from red to green. And that's what we're trying to show. And so that's one of the important things about this, is to say, look, we want to demonstrate the progress the patient's making or not if they haven't been compliant. It's like all these things. Let's not guess. Let's make sure we provide the data for you, the provider, but equally the great supplements that you guys have. When you put those in conjunction, really good things happen. So let's not just go, oh, well, I just ran the supplements. How do you feel? I think I'm feeling better. And one of the other things we've also kind of learned over the years, that this is a great test for amnesia, because it's remarkable how many patients come into the office feeling like, I feel terrible, doc. And they get tested 6 months later. Yeah, I feel fine. I don't think I feel any different. So it not only cures amnesia, but hopefully deals with the leaky gut as well.
I love that. One more for me before I turn it over to Todd. You guys refocused on the fit test, which is an incredible starting point with KBMO. You guys are branching off and you have a few more tests that you're offering. Maybe you could speak to those at a high level before Todd works on how we get this into your practice.
Sure. So the other 2 tests that we've added is organic acids and a glyphosate test. And it was really through, I go to a lot of, if not all the trade shows. Hopefully saw a number of you at Great Lakes. That was an amazing event that NutraRounds held. So again, I love being out there, talking to providers, finding out what they like, what they don't like, what can we improve. All feedback always welcome. And so one of the things that I was hearing on a recurring basis was people were frankly really upset that organic acids was a really good test, but it hadn't been improved for 20 years. The corollary of all these changes that we keep making, adding the 176, doing all these different things because we want to listen to the provider, want to improve it. So I was like, really? They went, yeah. And then it was almost the classical, disaster that befalls a lot of these labs. Lab, brilliant ownership, sells it to finance, finance flips it 3 years later type thing. But in that 3 years, they might have put a couple of more salespeople on because they want to drive the revenue line. What they forget to do is focus on the R&D and the science. And so that's really what's happened with a number of the organic acid tests out there. So what we said is, look, how do we approach this? And as with the food sensitivity, we had Dr. Brent Dorval on staff. So we went out and hired the team from Great Plains who developed the original organic acid test 20 years ago. And that team has basically spent 2 years in Kansas City, Missouri, developing that test for us. It's a phenomenal test. All the bodies that were buried that have not been improved in 20 years have been dealt with. One of the key things is we upgraded all the instrumentation. So think going from a flip phone to an iPhone. So it measures now parts per trillion, not parts per million. How does that help? Well, basically, for example, when you do an organic acid test, it's a urine-based test. And one of the things that providers and patients were complaining about was 10% generally had to be rerun because they couldn't get to the level of sensitivity that they required. We're 40 times more sensitive than those old style tests. I think what we've tried to bring it to it is the right science, make sure all the markers make sense. We've broken it down into 5 key areas versus 70 markers, which frankly, I challenge most people to even say them, let alone understand what they are. So the idea was, how do we break this down? How do we almost democratize this testing, make it easy for everyone to understand. And that was made possible by having a team of guys who'd been deep in the weeds on this for like 30 years. So they looked at the report and they said, look, we want to simplify this report, hence why it's in these 5 different groups. Again, it's coming up with science-led things, making sure you've got the best science possible, and then putting that through the 20,000 providers plus that we have. So giving them what they want, because that is a really, really good test and works beautifully on some of these patients that come in and go, look, I've just got either, non-specific symptoms, I can't work it out, long COVID, something like that. And this is a really good test to kind of look at what lies beneath alongside of just saying we're inflamed. So I think those in conjunction are proving to be really popular. Glyphosate, I don't need to tell the Midwest why we need to test for glyphosate, but it's one of those things where we looked at that and came up with a very, very accurate test in that area. Because again, historically, we were seeing lots of people going, no result possible. Well, that's about the worst possible thing you can tell anyone, isn't it? The idea was working on the science, making sure we cleaned up all the sample prep and some of those elements which are really critical in getting a good result. We all are aware that glyphosate is a problem. It does bad things to your gut and brain and a number of other elements as well. So we wanted to make sure for all those patients who are looking at kind of non-specific stuff, let's try and rule some of these things out as well. That nicely fits well with the organic acids. We've got an unbelievable team of scientists there who are focused very much on developing that science with the latest equipment and the latest lab to make sure everything is best of the best. And so, my long-suffering family and wife going, oh, what have you done now? But it's one of those things where we're really excited because it's a great team and it's a great test. And I think as we're seeing now, rolling that out, and actually in the next couple of months, we're going to have some of the great providers who run that test talking about how they've implemented it. We've got, one of the guys is Dr. Frank Aita. He basically did it as a favor. He said, I'll run this. I don't know what you're talking about, James. We've got people at that end of the spectrum. And then we've got a couple of others who are dyed-in-the-wool specialists in this area as well, who use it in oncology and different other things. So we're trying to cross the kind of the zenith of where everyone might sit in terms of understanding some of these tests as well.
Yeah, very good. James, great stuff, great information. Looking at our, practitioners and clinicians, talk about the onboarding process as someone that's not, implementing the tests as now. How do they get onboarded? How do they get set up? And then maybe speak on to how do they get their initial order.
Before I go on to that, I'm going to say we're going to put it out next week. The first supplement protocol we have for the organic acid is from NutraRounds. So that'll be going out and we'll be spreading that out to everyone in the next couple of weeks.
Very good.
Mark your calendars. As you start running your organic acid test, you'll have that NutraRounds protocol as well. So that's an exciting kind of news flash there as well. But how basically they come on board, they either come to the website or they work with you guys in terms of signing them up. We offer the testing through NutraRounds. So when you order your supplements, you can also order the tests as well. So that makes it really straightforward in terms of doing that. If you have an account with NutraRounds, you already have an account. So it's as simple as that. So I think that's the nice thing. And Joel and the team there have been fantastic to work with in terms of enabling that to happen. We also, though, have, if anyone has any questions about the testing, we have a lady called Dr. Val Phillips who goes through any of the food sensitivity testing with you. And then we have, as I said, Dr. Matt Pratt-Hyatt, who runs the organic acid division for me. So he's available to answer any questions there as well. So he's really knowledgeable. He's done over 10,000 of these reviews already. So our approach is let's make sure, we don't kind of hire the fresh out of college. Just make sure we've got some really serious experience. And that's been really helpful in terms of the development of that test, in terms of making sure that, as I say, we know where the bodies are buried and we've fixed them all.
That's a huge benefit. That's a huge asset for all our clinicians, is that interpretation support that you guys offer. So they just simply call you guys right away, or they set up
exactly. We send them a link and they sign up, and then we get that sorted out. It's really key, especially with that. We've got more and more webinars. We've got a really good provider's guide for both the food sensitivity and the organic acids. I know maybe I'm too old to be doing this still, but I love talking to people about this stuff. So I think most practitioners are the same. When they get that first result, doesn't matter how many gigabytes of information I get sent, I still like to talk to someone who's an expert and say, look, how do I read this? And then, that's generally how most of us learn. So the idea is let's give people the opportunity to do that. And that's something that we're very proud of, in terms of that opportunity at no cost to actually make sure that we're educating the providers in terms of the interpretation.
What's your thoughts when they receive like the supplemental protocol? A lot of times I get the question, is this like 100% should we lean on this, or this is like a starting point? What's your opinion on that?
So I think it's a combination thing, and it's so good with the food sensitivity because they're eliminating the foods anyway. We're identifying through that gut barrier, do they have leaky gut? And you guys have the best products for that. So I think that's the nice thing. It's really that kind of 1 and 1 equals 3, and I think that's the perfect thing here is that yes, you could just trust to eliminate the foods, but why not try and heal the gut with the great supplements that are out there as well? So I think for me, and it's funny, we had Dr. Frank Guidi doing a case study last night with for A4M, and it was really that combination. It was fascinating to hear. The testing was great to identify some of the issues, but then it was really then using supplements to say, look, how do I then heal as well and protect and repair? And I think that's the important thing and that's really one of the things I'm most excited about is, for me, it's the combination of stuff. And I think for the longest time in this industry, people have been really good at focusing on their own little world versus going, look, let's try and give the practitioners a hand here by saying, if you do this test and then use these types of supplements, then it gives them a really good direction to travel. And I think that's the important thing. And as you know, Todd, the providers are, pretty individualized people anyway, but at least it gives them some direction to say, this is really helpful because if this has been put together by Nutridyne, they know their stuff. That's really helpful. And I think from my standpoint, I think it's disingenuous for a lab to say, oh, and here's my supplement. Guess what? You've got all these positives. Let's make sure you run lots of my supplements. Not a So I think to keep that kind of like difference between kind of church and state, as it were, to say, right, here we go. You've got the test. So identifying some stuff. And here's some of the world-leading supplement companies, I think is really helpful.
And I think you've done a great job with this already on our podcast here. But if you have a clinician right now that's on the fence, they look at their bottom line number and they see your 30-second elevator speech on their return on investment with the test.
Well, I think, like I said, I think the nice thing here is don't necessarily get fixated in the ROI on the test. Mm-hmm. You're going to make money on the test, but you've also put in place the supplement protocol, so that as well. And as I said, it is so common that once a single family member gets tested, then they'll get multiple family members coming in as well, and patients start feeling better. And it's one of the few tests, I said, where there's no judgment attached to it. So they can rush out, do the test, feel better. And then for the provider, where the ROI comes is a long-term relationship with that patient because they've built the trust. They've built the trust around a test that the patient understands, they were bought into, and then generally it becomes a long-term relationship with them, their friends, family as well. So I think it's, for me, that's the elevator pitch. And I've seen it happen so frequently now that, that's why I've got the confidence to say, look, that's what we've seen and seen it with, many, many providers now.
And what I always say too is, like, you take away the guesswork, especially if you have a real tricky patient in mind, give them answers right away.
Yeah. And I think if they're inflamed, the food sensitivity is great. If it's really unclear what might be going on, I think the organic acids is a wonderful test because it's 5 tests in one. You're looking at detox pathways, you're looking at neurotransmitters, you're looking at mold. So, all these different things, it gives you a great triage to work out what lies beneath. And so I think it's a really powerful tool to kind of help get providers, especially if it was simple, hate to say it, but maybe the primary care guy might have got lucky and fixed them. Generally, most of the providers that we all deal with, they get the complex cases. And so I think these types of tests really help give the provider a head start in terms of trying to really understand what lies beneath, whether it's the inflammatory response via their diet, or the different elements that we test through the organic acids as well.
Yeah, really well said. Yeah, thank you, James.
And to that point, I just want to circle back to the gut barrier being a standalone follow-up, because I think that's where you start to get patient buy-in, right? The patient really then sees we've moved the needle, right? So we're on the right path, and that ROI comes from, again, that stickiness that gets created when you have success and you can quantify that for the patient. And it's not the like, oh, do I feel better or not? But on paper, we can
Yeah.
see that we've really made some significant improvements.
And I think the nice thing actually is like, well, did we get all 4 of those right? No. So 3 of them are great. Here's one that's still outlying. Let's keep working on that. And so, but to your point, you've got the evidence and you've got the proof in front of them to go, oh, that makes sense. Sign me up for another couple of months, to fix that LPS. I recognize now you've told me about it, what I should be doing it. Because again, no one's coming into the surgery going, God, I can't wait to get an LPS test done. So it's kind of one of those things. It's like, it's builds the kind of pathway for them to say, look, and by the way, we've got these great products to deal with these things. Now we've identified it on an individualized basis. And I think for a lot of the providers, kind of back to Todd's question, most patients are looking for an individualized solution. And so that's what this test really kind of helps the provider do, is dramatically change where they are in the continuum of providers, because they're taking the time to look at that patient as an individual versus going, oh, I've already written that script before the next guy comes in. So the idea here is that's where some of this advanced testing is really, really effective. As I say, in partnership with great supplementation like the stuff that NutraRounds provide as well.
I think you said that so well. If we look at the human organism, how we look at our bank account, you're both looking at the withdrawals that you're making there and the inputs that you're making. And we partner with NutraRounds specifically because they're taking the same sort of care and the same sort of approach with these solutions that are helping correct and take that load off of the body. So you have hand-in-hand diagnosis and solution along with the dietary guidance that we're able to help provide along with the solutions you guys are making. I just can't say thank you enough for you taking the time to be here with us, to do this,
Definitely.
and to go through all these things. It's affected our territories and our lives, and we're excited that our doctors are going to get to hear more about this and put it into their practice. So
yeah,
thanks
my pleasure. My
solution.
pleasure. And again, we've got more tests and stuff coming out, so we'd love to come back on and in the future and kind of go through that, or Q&A or whatever people want to do. But yeah, it's a great honor to be in front of all 3 of you, and then obviously everyone who listens as well. So much
thank you,
appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, absolutely. Maybe we'll have a follow-up question and answer. We'd love to hear from you guys and what you'd like to hear from us. So maybe we'll do more of this and we'll have different speakers on. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.
Bye.